welcome. Tonight, we drift back into the mists of early medieval Scandinavia, to a world shaped by ice, by oaths, by salt on the sea, wind and firelight in dark halls. But this is not a story of warriors, not a tale of conquest or honor or fame. No long ship gliding across the fjord. Tonight, instead we descend quietly into the world beneath, to one that carried it all, silently. This is a story of the thrall, the Viking slave. They did not write their names in the sagas. They left no runestones behind. And yet they built the hearths. They spun the cloth. They gathered the firewood. They held the newborn children of their owners. They were the foundation upon which the Viking Age stood. So as you lay your head down tonight, imagine not the rush of battle, ... but the slower rhythm of days filled with quiet labor, heavy, unnoticed, and uncelebrated. Imagine the world through the eyes of one who served, not with loyalty, but without choice. Let the flicker of the fire guide your thoughts. Let the past unfold gently and slowly, like morning fog across a valley. And so we begin. Imagine yourself waking before the sun. The longhouse is still dark, and the hearth has gone cold overnight. It's your job, quietly, automatically, to be the first to rise. You move with practiced steps, not to disturb the others, still wrapped in sleep. The floor is earthen, slightly damp from last night's weather, and the scent of ashes lingers. You gather kindling, kneel by the hearth, and coax the flame back to life. Your hands are rough from the cold. You do not remember a time when they weren't. You wrap a worn woolen shawl around your shoulders. Not yours, of course, but passed down from someone else's cast-offs. The first task of the day is fetching water. Outside, it's still gray. The world feels paused, except you. You carry a wooden bucket down to the stream. The path is uneven, the ground soft underfoot, and the bucket creaks with every step. There's no one to speak to, no one to help. Water, fire, then food. You grind the barley with a handstone, your arms already aching. You stir the porridge as it thickens, careful not to let it burn. You are not allowed to eat yet. The family begins to wake. A child complains of the cold. A man shouts for his boots. A woman frowns at a torn seam in her tunic. You will be the one to mend it. You bow your head and keep moving. By midday, you are in the fields. If it is summer, the sun burns your neck. If it is winter, the cold bites at your fingers until they no longer feel like your own. The work doesn't change, only the texture of the suffering. You help with sowing or harvesting, depending on the season. You are not paid, but you are expected to do it well. You are watched. Some days, you tend to the animals. You scrape manure, lead stubborn goats, and repair broken fencing with whatever you can find. When an animal goes missing, it is your fault. When one dies, it is also your fault. Back in the longhouse, you help with spinning, weaving, patching worn clothes. You learn to move in silence. You learn not to meet eyes too often. Learn that your comfort is irrelevant. Meals are eaten after the family finishes. You sit by the wall. If there are leftovers, they are yours. If there are none, there is still work. You sleep last. Sometimes on straw, sometimes on bare ground, sometimes near the door, where the wind leaks in. You are not cold. You are used to cold. You dream, maybe, but you never speak of your dreams. This is life, not as told in sagas, but as lived in the shadows of them. Let's shift now from the anonymous blur of everyday life to a name, a single name that made it into the sagas. Her name was Melkorka, and though much of her story is wrapped in myth, suggestion, and centuries of retelling, it's one of the rare glimpses into the life of a Viking thrall who is remembered. Melkorka appears in the Laxdela saga, written long after her life had passed. She was said to be Irish, the daughter of an Irish king. But when we meet her in the saga, she is not a princess. She is property. Let's go back. Imagine you're a young woman living in a wealthy Irish household. Your father is a ruler, or at least a man of standing. You live near the sea. You hear stories of Norsemen, of ships with curved prows, of fire on the horizon. And then one day it is no longer a story. You are taken. The sagas are silent on the violence. But the silence says much. What matters to them is what came next. She was brought to Norway, sold, and eventually purchased by a man named Höskuldur Dalakarlsson. Höskuldur was a chieftain from Iceland. On a trading voyage, he visited a slave market in Norway, and among the many thralls, selected a young woman, quiet, dignified, and striking. He bought her, took her with him back to Iceland, and as was common, took her as a concubine. Her silence was notable. She did not speak. People thought she was mute. But one day Höskuldur heard her speaking softly to their young son, and it was not in Norse. He asked her name. She replied Melkorka. She said she was the daughter of an Irish king named Myrakartin. It was an astonishing claim. Some believed her. Others suspected she had invented a noble past. But either way, her identity gave her a strange kind of weight in the household. She had gone from unnamed and voiceless to someone with a story, a lineage, a name that people remembered. Her son, Olafur, was raised in part by her, and when he came of age, she encouraged him to travel to Ireland, to meet her family, reclaim heritage, and perhaps build connections. In the saga, he succeeds. He is welcomed by the Irish court and returns to Iceland with prestige. Melkorka, though, never returned. Her life, real or embellished, reminds us of the strange duality of slavery in the Viking world. Thralls were property, but they were also people. Sometimes they were powerful ones. Sometimes they still had voices even when the world told them to be silent. Melkorka's story is unusual. Not because it was rare for women to be enslaved, but because her name was remembered, because she spoke, because her son listened. She existed at the seam between status and servitude, between identity and anonymity, and perhaps in the quiet hours of the night by a low-burning hearth, she remembered the shores of her homeland, sang songs in a language no one else could understand. Let us move now from the flicker of firelight in Melkorka's longhouse to something colder, more silent, the quiet, patient memory of the earth itself. What can archaeology tell us about the lives of Viking slaves? Not much, but even that is telling. Thralls by their nature were people who left little behind. They did not own things. They did not write. They were rarely buried with markers or gravestones. Their bones, when found, are anonymous and often broken. Archaeologists digging at Viking Age sites sometimes find strange burial plots, unmarked, shallow, with no grave goods, no weapons, no jewelry, no tools, just a body curled tightly as if in sleep or shame. Some of these may be thralls, or the poor, or both. Imagine that. A life spent serving, laboring, enduring, and then a burial barely acknowledged. But there are other clues, subtle ones, found in the margins. In large farms or chieftain estates, excavation reveals multi-room longhouses. And in the very back, furthest from the fire, small, cramped side rooms with low ceilings and little light. These may have been where the thralls slept. Close enough to be called, but distant enough to be kept apart. Remnants of bedding, straw, perhaps, charcoal marks from tiny lamps, a bone comb, a single bead. Not much, but enough to imagine. In one excavation, a human skeleton was found with an iron ring around the neck, fused in place by rust and time, a slave collar, a rare, chilling find. Most thralls were not physically bound. Their bondage was legal, social, enforced by violence and custom. But some were literally chained. And even centuries later, that metal ring remained, a silent testimony to a life of ownership. It's no name, no records, just bone and iron. Other clues come from tools. Grinding stones worn down from years of kneeling, heavy iron cooking pots too large for one person to lift, and pits filled with animal bones, refused from the meals cooked but not eaten, when sight bones were cut in strange ways, marks suggesting that the people preparing the meat didn't have knives of their own. They used whatever they could find. This, too, is a trace of slavery. Because when you are not seen as a person, you are not given tools or time or space. You use what's left. You live in the margins, and you die there too. The sagas, as we've seen, rarely speak of thralls. When they do, it's usually to describe their labor or their punishment. But sometimes a voice slips through, a joke made by a thrall, a clever remark, story passed down, like echoes. Small, fleeting signs that these people, unnamed, unseen, had lives just as rich and real as the lords and warriors. And though they lived in silence, the soil has remembered them. Let us drift now, upward, from the back rooms, from the smoke-darkened hearth, from the worn knees and calloused hands of the thrall, to the halls of those who owned them, the free, the wealthy, the powerful. It is time to understand the world that sat atop the Viking social ladder, and how far removed it was from those at the bottom. To be free in the Viking Age was not simply a matter of birth, though that helped. It was to be seen. A free person had a name that mattered in law, a voice that counted in decisions, property that could be passed down, and if wronged, he could seek compensation, or blood. He might be poor, yes, but not unseen. A freeman could marry whom he pleased, own land, carry weapons, sit at the thing, the assembly of free men, and speak. Even a modest farmer, with little more than sheep and soil, stood far above a thrall in standing, because the line between free and unfree was not one of wealth, it was one of rights. And above the freemen sat the elite, the jarls, the chieftains, the men and sometimes women, who held power by strength, by heritage, or by fortune. Their homes were large, well-built halls, heated, decorated, filled with goods from distant lands, silk from the east, silver from the south, amber from the north. They wore fine wool cloaks, embroidered with colored thread. They drank from glass vessels, their meals served on decorated wooden platters, and around them stood the people who made it all possible, thralls, quiet and waiting. Imagine a feast, the sound of laughter, music, the clinking of horns, roasted meat turning on spits, bright firelight dancing across painted shields, and in the shadows a thrall watching, waiting, holding a pitcher, noticed unless he spills. Some thralls, a few, were freed. A master might grant freedom to a loyal servant, or a thrall might earn enough silver to buy their release, or marry a free person if permitted. These cases were not common, but they were real. Freed thrall became a licentiate, still marked by their past, often with limited rights, but technically free. They could never fully escape their former status, but their children, perhaps, might. Freedom was a ladder, difficult, narrow, but not impossible. But for most, the divide was absolute. A Viking could own many thralls. It was a sign of status, like horses or rings. They were named in inventories, given as wedding gifts, punished, sold, traded, and sometimes killed. Without recourse, in a legal sense, thralls were property. And that shaped everything. Because the higher you climbed in Viking society, the more your life was defined by agency, choice, and power. The lower you sank, the more it was shaped by obedience, invisibility, and control. When we picture the Viking Age, we often imagine warriors, explorers, shipbuilders, queens. But beneath it all, holding the axes, rowing the boats, harvesting the grain, washing the linens, raising the children not their own, were thralls. Invisible in life, mostly forgotten in history, but essential. They remind us that every great hall stood on someone's bent back, that every golden feast was made possible by unseen hands, and that freedom, so easily romanticized, was never equally shared.
So now, dear listener, let the fire die down. The smoke from the hearth has curled toward the roof beams. The tools of the day, the spindle, the knife, the broom, are set aside. The shipyards are silent. The longhouse is quiet. Even the footsteps of the overseer have faded. The day is done in that distant world of the Viking Age. And you've traveled far. Through fields and fishnets. Through chains and customs. Through whispers of resistance and faint glimmers of hope. Through feasts you could not taste, and duties you could never escape. You've seen what it meant to live without freedom, to serve silently, to hope cautiously, to exist unrecorded. And yet, within even the harshest rhythms of Viking life, there were moments of warmth, of shared bread, of stolen rest beneath the stars, of quiet glances and muted laughter by the fire. Not all comfort comes from ease. Sometimes it comes from endurance. And now, as you lay in your own warm bed, free to rest, free to dream, free to forget, let the story drift away with you into the gentle hush of sleep. The past cannot touch you here, but it can teach. And tonight, it has whispered softly through time. Sleep well, traveler. You've seen the other side of legend. Until the next story, good night, and peace be upon your dreams.